we go.
Good morning, friends. I'm Mike Trotman, retired Presbyterian pastor. I'm located in a suburb of St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm joined by my, more importantly, great friends and wonderful colleagues, the Reverend Jennifer Long, who's pastor at Emmanuel Lutheran in Corning, New York, and the Reverend Dr. Steve Langford, who's also retired and is in the heat kitchen of Arlington, Texas. And today we're bringing you wisdom from Proverbs.
So I'm reading from Proverbs chapter 8, first 11 verses, the New Revised Standard Translation. Does not wisdom call, and does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights, beside the way, at the crossroads, she takes her stand. Beside the gates, in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals, she cries out. To you, O people, I call, and my cry is to all that live. O simple ones, learn prudence, acquire intelligence, you who like it. Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. For my mouth will utter truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are righteous. There is nothing twisted or crooked in them. They are all straight to one who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. So take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice golds. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare to her.
I'm continuing with verses 22 to 36. The Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of long ago. Ages ago I was set up, at the first before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth, when there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills, I was brought forth. When he had not yet made the earth and fields, or the world's first bits of soil. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him like a master worker, and I was daily his delight, playing before him always, playing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the human race. And now, my children, listen to me. Happy are those who keep my ways, hear instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it. Happy is the one who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting beside my doors. For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But those who miss me injure themselves. All who hate me love death.
Mm.
And may we have wisdom as we discuss wisdom.
Absolutely.
That's asking a lot of me.
I think of that favorite line from the Lucy Ball show, and Ricky and Lucy are talking, and Ricky would say, "You got some explaining to do, Lucy." Somehow that hit my mind and seems to fit in this context. We have some explaining to do, folks.
I always think it's interesting, and because this is what I do for a living, the idea that wisdom gets personified as a woman. Lots of people use Sophia, but I'm always tempted by happy are those that listen to what I say. I just can I just put that on my fridge for my husband to see every morning before he goes to work?
Yeah, and I think what this text says to me is that we want to be kind of either or, black and white, and simple sometimes with our uses of the Bible. But here it really is, it doesn't really conform very easily we want as Christians to make this a Trinitarian passage. I don't think it's Trinitarian in the sense that wisdom is something created. And the traditional Jesus story is that he was there from the beginning, will be there at the end, not begotten, pre-existent. And so that, let's not be so fast to kind of conflate the stories into one narrative. Let's be flexible how we use text like this and come to, I think, some more nuanced understandings. And as wisdom played with upon the creation and with joy of human beings, I think that's what we need to do when we use the Bible. We do it with some playfulness and some joy that allows us to dive deeper into really kind of, neat narratives about God.
I was thinking as you were talking, Mike, the idea, I want to say that sometimes this chapter 8 gets kind of a heading that is like the gifts of wisdom, the first section. I was wondering if one of the gifts of wisdom is the opportunity to see a bigger picture, the opportunity to be more flexible, and how we think about and understand and maybe even engage God in our lives.
Absolutely.
But I have to say the pieces of this text that really, really capture me is the end, like the 32 to 36 portion, where, maybe that's not where it was, where it talks about play.
Yeah.
Maybe that was further up. And I know that
31.
okay. That I was, and that I was first it was I was daily his delight, but then it was I take delight in the human race. Just thinking how that stands in opposition to the idea that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And not that I just, maybe I'm incorrect on this. In my experience, the Christian church has leaned very heavily on how sinful we are. And I feel like as human beings, I feel like I, as a human being, and I'm going to broaden it, which I probably shouldn't, to be human beings, well, I'm well aware of how sinful I am. I'm well aware of how much I suck. It is harder for me to think about how is it that God delights in me? How do I engage the world as a human that God delights in? And how does that inspire me to engage others? This is someone whom God delights in.
Richard Rohr uses the language of sin management. And in my thinking recently, it strikes me that we struggle with being human. To be human is by nature to be incomplete, to be in process, to not be full grown. And somewhere along the way, we use the language of sin, condemnation, shame, about that inadequacy. And our sin management approach hasn't gotten us beyond it. We're still human. So maybe we need a better way of dealing with our humanness, the fact that we don't measure up yet. And that better way is the way that Jesus proclaimed in grace. Here it says wisdom delights in the human race. There's no problem on wisdom's part with us being human and inadequate and falling short. I'm reminded of Psalm 103, where it talks about how God deals with our sin. And the text says, for he remembers that we are dust. In other words, God's not surprised by our humanness, by our failures. We're the ones who have a hard time with it.
Yeah. And I don't like that how we conflate and put together human and sin as if, that's a definition.
But
I
that
know
is how
some
it's
of
thought
the,
about.
well, I think some of the early church fathers and mothers, and I don't remember who, I want to say Irenaeus, but I'm probably wrong, um, but talked about original blessing
Yeah.
more than they talked about original sin.
Yeah, the Genesis 1.
And and I don't know if it's futile, but I kind of punch back because I think what wisdom is, if we look at the broader definition of wisdom in the scriptures, it really is the knowledge of all the peoples in the Middle East and that part of the world. It's not just unique to Israel, it was a shared experience of being human. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in thinking that, we're not wise, we don't have anything to offer, poor us, we're sinful people who cannot even approach and see relationship with God as a friendship sometimes, as Jesus invited us to do, as part of the family. Um, we get so caught up in making it, that we can't be both incomplete and a blessing. When the reality is it's both. I mean, we are a blessing, but we're also on the journey, working out our salvation, as Steve mentioned last week, with fear and trembling. And I think that's so important to hold up for people to hear.
And I also, that I think you're pointing out, like, Israel was not unique. And yet, biblically, we can find that over and over again. And it makes me wonder, I don't know how I would ever capture this. And maybe that's also because I suck at church history, but what made it important for Israel to be so unique? Was it that they had been through so much and they were so small? Was it, I mean, I was thinking, when you were talking about too, like the wisdom of a whole shared people, it was everybody in the Middle East. My first wondering was, and how well did they know each other? How much did they travel? How, like, it was everybody, but the shared knowledge you're talking about looked incredibly different from what the shared knowledge of today looks like. Like, just, we have so much access to what people are doing and how they're doing it. And it's a completely different set of circumstances then. I'm not sure if I'm being clear, but yeah.
Yeah.
Or was it the infringing? As people got to know each other, as you realized that you were not just this unique group of people, did it become more important to say, well, this is just about us? I don't know how I would figure that out, but it definitely has me wondering about it.
Sure.
Well, the very foundation of Israel's identity in Exodus is that we're different. We're a holy nation. That is, a different people. We're set apart. In other words, we're not like everybody else.
Yeah, and I would argue that through the Hebrew scriptures, there's two really kind of different ways of understanding that chosen people, motif that makes us unique and different. So the struggle was always, I think, in Israel between that we are unique, God chosen, and I think that, and we have a special place in the world that exempts us from the rules with others. I think that characterizes some of the politics in the state of Israel today, the Jewish state of Israel. And secondly, that Israel was blessed not to hold on to that blessing, but to be a blessing to the nations. So that's the two kind of things that come in and out depending on what our focus is.
Yeah. And so we start out in we are exclusive people, we are unique, special, and chosen. And yet when we get to Jesus, he's trying to say, no, everyone is special and chosen. And your role is to help everyone else experience the blessedness. And yet what we ended up with was a religion based upon purity, the idea that we have to be pure, that we have to be holy, which means we have to condemn where we fail to measure up.
I was just thinking too about connecting blessing to wisdom, how is it that wisdom blesses? And I'm thinking about what are some of the ways, how is it that as a person, I pass on wisdom to what I consider to be the next generation or to somebody I think might be wanting it? And how useful is that? And how often is that actually a blessing? Yeah, but how does money get how, if we are blessed to be a blessing, if it's not just about Israel, it's about all humanity being blessed to be a blessing. How do I live that out? What am I passing on? And yeah, I'm trying to think, what is the help that is helpful versus the help that is not helpful? And I'm just thinking about, and if I've already mentioned it here, I'm really sorry for listeners who have to hear it again, and for you, Mike and Steve, that my son had a car breakdown on the highway a couple of weeks ago and texted me and said, I just want to let you know this has happened. And I was doing a funeral. And he just, he texted me that it had happened. He did not ask for anything. And I immediately responded, oh, by the way, my car is at the funeral home. So if you want to walk and get it, there's an extra kid that you can do that. And he did not ask for that. He didn't. And yet I was automatically able to give it. And for me, the best part of the story comes actually texted back, that's a great idea, Mom, but I'm on the highway. And I would find out later that, and he had called AAA, that the AAA guy got there, looked underneath, said, hey, this thing's falling off, pulled the thing off, you can drive to work. So he got to work, he told me some amount of time late, that wasn't a big deal. And but what was my first response? This is a grown person. This person did not need the kind of wisdom I was offering in that moment. And that's not, I'm sure there's plenty of other examples of wisdom that I like to give just because. Yeah.
Well, it strikes me that maybe what wisdom is understanding life from God's perspective rather from our human perspective. That rather than this merit-based, shame-based way of trying to measure up and condemning those who don't, God says, you're my child, I'll take you where you are, and we'll walk together and grow up. What would it be like to live out of that sense of belovedness, that I don't have to fear or hate my weaknesses, that I don't have to hide them, that whole sense of Jung's The Shadow, those things that we don't think the world will accept, we can't accept, so we hide them. Wisdom would say, hey, let's deal with that differently.
I think, collective wisdom really is an important thing that can unite or give a little more solidarity among human beings. Knowing that what we know about life is expansive, and we may be different people from different parts of the world, having a more global sense in the time we live in. And who among us haven't read something of different people's practices of religious, whether indigenous or more sophisticated like Buddhist or Hindu, and not see something of a spark of the divine in that?
There's some truth in it.
Yeah, there's something in there that goes, yeah, that resonates with me. And I think that the thing that resonates in me is our common humanity, our experience as human beings in a really hard world and complicated world, and a dangerous world in some ways, because we make it dangerous and we make it complicated. More so because we cannot see that there is something that unites us or tells us that, your experience and my experience may be framed differently, but there is a commonality there that should strengthen our resolve to get along with one another.
So wisdom would say, look at what we have in common rather than how we're different.
Yeah.
So that our differences don't divide us. What we have in common unites us.
Yeah.
That's not the wisdom of the world. I'm reminded First Corinthians 2, where Paul contrasts the wisdom of the world with the wisdom of God.
I'm playing with this idea of growing up in my head and wondering how often the idea of it, I don't think that this is coming from anywhere else but in me. That to me, it always seemed that being grown up was a finished thing, as opposed to growing being a constant thing that's just always going on, that there is no, that up is not an end point. Because I think for me, that's really important. I think if I get caught by growing up is something, there's a finish line that has been reached.
Yeah.
That then I stop looking for opportunities to grow. And what's it mean to be a human being in this life that is trying to grow into what God may be inviting me to become? For me, ultimately, that's the intersection for me of wisdom. When I think I'm best able to engage wisdom, then I'm able to think about what invitations am I getting to grow into. Anyway, just playing with that.
No, I think that's because then it opens up the conversation even among young people. And we all have we have children who live very differently than we've ever lived, or and experience life through different lenses than we experience life. And yet they've done some things better than we have done. Can we learn from that? Can we grow up and create space to say, I don't have all the answers. I may not have many of the answers, but I'm curious. I think wisdom is about curiosity and seeking not to cement our own wisdom. But wisdom is always evolving and growing and more complex, and yet simpler
And maybe
than we ever imagined.
And maybe one of the characteristics of wisdom is a teachable spirit that's always willing to learn. That we don't arrive and I have the final answer.
Yeah, I like the idea of wisdom as both curiosity and complexity. I think I'm going to be playing with that over the next few days. And we are, believe it or not, to the end of our time. Who wants to pray us out?
So what is that text? Maybe it's in the Psalms that says, so grant us, O Lord, O God, your wisdom, that we may worthily magnify your name.
Amen.
Amen. Peace,
Amen.
friends.
Peace.
Peace.